The first rays of dawn struggled to pierce the dense green fog of the toxic marshlands, but they illuminated a sight both terrifying and magnificent. Ethan stood beside the woman he had saved, her armor slowly reassembling itself as if the swamp itself respected her presence. Sparks of blue energy danced along the cracks and etched markings, glowing brighter with every pulse of her breath. For a moment, Ethan simply stared, unsure of whether to be afraid or amazed. "You can fight them," he said quietly, almost to himself. She looked at him, her piercing eyes calm but calculating. "Not just fight," she said. "I can end this before it begins." The drones from last night had been only the first wave. More were coming, and not all of them were unmanned machines. Alien soldiers sent by the remnants of the Orion faction had tracked her signature through the swamp. They believed her dead, yet she had survived, and that survival was unacceptable to those who wanted power. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He had no weapons, no training for war, but he refused to leave her side. "Then we stand together," he said. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." She studied him again, a faint smile brushing her lips. "You have courage," she said. "Few have faced the unknown without fear. I will not forget this." Before Ethan could respond, the first of the enemy scouts appeared on the ridge above the swamp. Their armor was sleek and alien, their weapons pulsing with energy. They were trained killers, each one ready to fire at a moment's notice. But what they saw froze them in place. The woman, Kalara, as Ethan would soon learn, stood tall, her armor fully restored, glowing with energy that made the air shimmer. "You dare approach me?" Kalara's voice was steady, commanding, and it carried over the swamp like a ripple of power. The enemy hesitated. Legends of Kalara had been passed down through generations. They had been told she was unbeatable, a warrior whose skill and strength had turned the tide of countless battles. And now, standing before them, alive and fully aware, she radiated the aura of a being who had never known defeat. Ethan's heart pounded, but he did not step back. He had saved her life. Now he would stand beside her. He noticed the subtle movements in her armor, the way it flexed and readied itself for battle, and he realized that she trusted him. Not fully perhaps, but enough to let him witness what would happen next. The enemy attacked. They charged, weapons raised, their steps making the swamp shiver beneath them. Kalara moved with a fluid grace that defied description. Each strike, each motion was precise and deadly. She deflected energy blasts with the edges of her glowing armor, countering attacks before they could land. One by one, the enemy soldiers fell, incapacitated by skill and speed that seemed almost superhuman. Ethan watched, mesmerized and terrified as she moved through the battlefield. And yet she did not leave him behind. Whenever a soldier tried to circle around, Kalara shifted instinctively, positioning herself to keep Ethan safe. She was a warrior, yes, but she was also aware of his presence, and it mattered to her. When the last drone was neutralized, Kalara turned toward Ethan. "You are lucky I value life," she said softly. "Most would not survive standing here with me in the swamp." Ethan shook his head, awe and disbelief mixing in his expression. "I didn't think about luck, I just did what had to be done." Kalara's gaze softened, and for a moment she looked less like a legendary warrior and more like a person grateful for another's courage. "That is what makes humans remarkable," she said. "Courage without expectation, bravery without glory. You are extraordinary in your simplicity." Before Ethan could reply, Kalara scanned the horizon. The swamp rippled with more movement, heavier than before. This time it was not just scouts, it was an entire force, armed and ready to capture or kill her. Ethan felt a surge of fear, but Kalara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay behind me," she instructed. "If you try to fight alone, you will die. But if you stand with me, you may live, and you will learn what humans can truly accomplish." As the enemy approached, Kalara activated a device embedded in her armor. A pulse of energy shot outward, illuminating the swamp in a brilliant glow. Trees and mist shook, and the approaching soldiers faltered. They were not just facing a warrior. They were facing a force that made the swamp itself tremble. Ethan could see it now, the sheer scale of her power. Kalara was not just a fighter. She was a symbol, a living embodiment of what legends promised but few had witnessed. And yet she was not arrogant or cruel. Every action she took minimized harm to the swamp itself, and spared those who surrendered. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was minutes. Kaylara moved like a storm, and Ethan found himself inspired, not just by her power but by the principle she represented. Strength combined with responsibility, courage mixed with compassion. He realized that humanity had more to offer than mere survival instincts. Humans had ingenuity, determination, and morality, qualities that could shape the galaxy. When the last of the enemy retreated, broken and defeated, Kaylara finally lowered her weapon. Her armor dimmed, returning to a calm glow. She turned to Ethan, who was breathless and covered in swamp residue, his eyes wide with amazement. "You saved me," she said again, softer this time. "And yet, you have fought your own battle merely by standing here. You are remarkable." Ethan felt his face flush. "I didn't fight like you, I just believed in doing the right thing." Kaylara smiled, a rare expression that seemed almost human. Perhaps that is what makes humans extraordinary. Not strength, not speed, not technology, but the choice to act without expectation. "You have reminded me that there is value in every life, no matter how small or untrained." For the first time, Ethan realized the magnitude of what he had been part of. He had rescued a legend, stood beside her in battle, and witnessed a force of galactic importance with his own eyes. Yet it was his human courage, his stubborn determination to do what was right, that had mattered the most. Kaylara extended her hand. "Come with me," she said. "There is much you do not know about this galaxy, and even more that you can influence. You have shown qualities that are rare, and I would be honored if you stood by my side." Ethan hesitated, thinking of his simple life as a researcher, of the quiet days he had known before the swamp. But then he looked at her, at the being who had survived wars, who carried the weight of legends, and who still recognized the value of a single human's courage. I will stand with you," he said finally, his voice steady, "if you need me." Kaylara nodded, and for the first time the two of them walked together through the swamp, not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners. The dangers of Draxus 4 still surrounded them, but together they faced them with determination, strength, and respect. As they emerged from the toxic fog, the swamp gave way to open terrain, and Kaylara spoke again. "The galaxy will hear of this day," she said. "Not because I survived, but because a human reminded me of what courage truly is. You, Ethan, are proof that humanity can rise to meet any challenge, no matter the odds." Ethan felt a swell of pride, but he also felt something deeper, a sense of purpose, a realization that even the smallest act of bravery could alter the course of legends. He had saved a warrior, yes, but in doing so, he had become part of a story far greater than himself. The two continued walking side by side, their steps synchronized with the rhythm of the galaxy's pulse. The sun rose higher, burning away the green fog, and with it came the promise of new challenges, new battles, and a new alliance between a legendary warrior and a human who had proven the indomitable strength of his species. And so, in a galaxy filled with uncertainty and danger, a single act of human courage had changed everything. A legend had survived not because of her alone, but because a human had risked everything without thought for himself. As the wind swept across the marshlands, carrying the scent of strange alien flora and distant storms, Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had many challenges ahead, but with courage, heart, and humanity, even the greatest threats could be faced and overcome. Kaylara looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "We will face what comes next," she said, "and humanity will stand with me. You have shown me that together we are unstoppable." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the exhilaration of possibility. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be part of something legendary, not just as a witness but as a participant, a human whose courage had shaped the future. And as they disappeared into the rising mist of the swamp, two very different beings, one human, one warrior, walked forward as equals, ready to face the galaxy together. Ethan had always believed that living with an alien would be interesting, maybe even fun, but he never expected it would happen during the Dravari mating season. The research station on the edge of the Andros sector had been designed for humans and alien species to live together. But even so, nothing in his training prepared him for what he would experience in the coming days. He had moved into the shared apartment with Zara, his alien roommate, several weeks earlier. Zara was a Dravari, a towering reptilian species known for their strength, intelligence, and occasionally their temper. Despite her imposing appearance, she had shown a surprising amount of patience in coexisting with him, tolerating his clumsy human habits and even joining him in routine chores. Ethan had grown accustomed to her silent presence. Most of the time she kept to herself, her glowing scales dimmed to soft tones, her eyes a calm green. Their conversations were minimal, limited to practical topics like shared chores, station news, or meal schedules. For a human who preferred quiet and order, this arrangement had seemed ideal. Yet that morning something felt different. Zara's movements were restless, her usually even breathing quickened, and she avoided eye contact as she moved through the apartment. The air between them was tense, and Ethan could sense a shift in her energy that he could not understand. He had just poured himself a cup of synthesized coffee when the station alarm echoed through the building. The announcement was calm, procedural, and yet it carried a weight that made Ethan's stomach twist. Attention all personnel. Dravari mating season has commenced. All Dravari are required to remain in designated quarantine areas. Cohabiting humans are advised to maintain distance. All automated doors will now enforce isolation protocols. Ethan froze. He had read about the mating season in station briefings, but he had assumed it was a distant concern, something that would not affect daily life. The warning was clear. Dravari instincts during this period were powerful, unpredictable, and dangerous. Before he could react, the apartment doors sealed with a hiss, locking them both inside. He turned to Zara, who had stopped moving in the middle of the room, her tail curling around her legs, scales pulsing faintly in shifting colors. "Zara," he said carefully, "the doors are locked. We're trapped here for the next 7 days." His voice was calm, but he could feel his heart beat faster than usual. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she paced, her long limbs moving gracefully yet stiff with tension. Ethan watched her, trying to gauge her mood. He had dealt with emergencies before, but this felt different. This was personal. This was instinct. He realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that Zara's body was reacting not just to the lockdown, but to something far older, far stronger than any station protocol. Ethan moved to give her space, stepping back and allowing her to continue her pacing. He tried speaking again. "I won't touch you. I just want to help if you need it." His words hung in the air. Zara's glowing scales flickered brighter and then dimmed, a sign Ethan had learned indicated inner conflict. She turned her head slightly toward him, her eyes briefly meeting his and then quickly looking away. "Stay away from me," she finally said, her voice low and strained. "My instincts, they will not listen much longer." Ethan nodded, choosing his next actions carefully. He moved around the apartment to make it more comfortable for her, adjusting the temperature controls, setting up partitions, and even arranging some furniture so she could have space to retreat. He remembered reading that Dravari were sensitive to environmental changes during mating season, that high or low temperatures could exacerbate their instincts. He did not fully understand her biology, but he understood the need for caution and respect. For hours, they lived in a tense silence. Ethan kept busy with small tasks, cleaning, checking equipment, even preparing meals. But his attention never left Zara. She remained in the living area, moving occasionally but keeping her distance. The station's automated systems raised the temperature, simulating the Dravari's natural climate preference during mating season. Sweat formed on Ethan's brow as the heat grew, but he refused to leave her side. He noticed that she was trembling slightly, not from anger, but from the overwhelming surge of her instincts. She was struggling to remain calm. As night fell, the situation intensified. Zara's usual restraint was failing. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever, a warning signal that Ethan had learned to respect. Her movements became more deliberate, her muscles tensing as though she were ready to spring. He reminded himself not to panic. She had never shown aggression toward him, and he trusted that her instincts would not override her understanding of him completely. He sat down on the far side of the room, careful to stay out of her path, and spoke in the softest voice he could muster. "I'm not afraid of you, Zara. I'm not here to hurt you." He waited, letting his words sink in. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her body slightly as if considering his words. Her tail shifted less aggressively. He realized that she was trying to gauge his reaction, trying to determine whether he was a threat or an ally. Hours passed. The heat in the apartment grew oppressive. Ethan noticed that Zara had positioned herself near the doorway, almost as if she were guarding him. At first, he misinterpreted the movement as a warning, a territorial display. But as he watched her, he began to understand something deeper. She was protecting him. Her instincts, violent and uncontrollable as they were directing her not to harm him but to keep him safe. For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. If he could remain calm, if he could show her that he was not a threat, perhaps they could survive the week together without incident. He offered her water from a container, speaking gently. "You don't have to speak. You can drink it if you want or not. It's your choice." She did not respond immediately, but after a moment she approached, lowered her head slightly, and drank. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it was significant. She had accepted his help without aggression. The following days were a careful balance of observation, distance, and subtle communication. Ethan learned to read the shifting patterns of her scales, the subtle flicks of her tail, and the way her eyes focused or looked away. He discovered that her instincts were strongest in the mornings and evenings, that temperature fluctuations affected her mood, and that she was calmer when he gave her space. He also began to see small signs of gratitude, a slight nod when he adjusted the environment, a pause near him when she might have moved away. Ethan also discovered the limits of his own patience. The heat was exhausting, the isolation mentally taxing. He missed the station cafeteria, the hum of other humans, and the simple comfort of solitude that was not fraught with danger. Yet each time he saw Zara struggle to maintain control, he felt a surge of admiration. She was a creature of incredible power, fighting against instincts she could not fully control. And yet she was choosing, in some sense, to coexist with him rather than harm him. By the fourth day, something changed. Zara began moving closer during her periods of rest. She would sit in the corner of the room, still tense but closer than before. She no longer hissed at sudden movements, and she allowed him to approach with small offerings of water and food. Ethan noticed that she began adjusting her own position based on his presence, as if trying to maintain a balance between instinct and reason. One evening, as the heat reached its peak, Zara finally spoke more than a single word. "You are not like others," she said, her voice low and strained. I do not understand why you are not afraid." Ethan smiled gently. "Because I trust you, Zara. I trust that you will not hurt me if I respect you. That's all I need to know." For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the temperature stabilizers. Then, for the first time since the lockdown began, Zara's posture relaxed slightly. Her scales dimmed from bright pulses to soft, steady tones. She did not sit beside him, but she did not move away either. The tension remained, but it was no longer hostile. It was a truce, delicate and fragile, but real. That night, Ethan lay on his side of the apartment, listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing, and realized something remarkable. The Dravari mating season was supposed to be dangerous, unpredictable, and even lethal to humans if mismanaged. Yet here he was, alive, unscathed, and forming a bond with a creature that could have easily overpowered him. He understood now that survival during this period was not just about avoiding aggression. It was about respect, patience, and understanding. He did not yet know what would happen when the cycle ended, or whether Zara's instincts would shift once more. But he did know one thing. Trust had been established, a fragile bridge between species. And in the universe, where humans often felt small and vulnerable, that bridge was more valuable than any weapon or shield. The rest of the night passed without incident. Ethan awoke the next morning, prepared for another day of careful navigation, but he felt a quiet confidence. He had survived the first days of the Dravari mating season. He had maintained his composure. And he had begun to understand his roommate, not as a predator, not as a mystery, but as a sentient being struggling with instincts far beyond human experience. As the sun of the Andros sector rose outside the apartment, Ethan looked at Zara, who was standing by the window, her